So I'm here with Wahsayah Whitebird, and he is a member of the city council in Ashland, Wisconsin. He was recently elected, but he's also a card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. So it's going to be quite an interesting conversation. There aren't many elected officials that are in the Communist Party of the United States. So why don't you tell us about yourself, Wahsayah? First of all, you're a little bit young. Can you tell us how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 28.
28 years old. Wow. And when were you elected to the city council?
Oh, I was elected just last year in April.
And what made you want to run?
Well, a big thing was I guess for a while I wanted to try to enact some more progressive policies, uh, trying to increase minimum wage and so on, and trying to see what I can do for my community as much as I can.
Now, how long have you been a member of the Communist Party?
Oh, about 2011, I believe. We joined way back, and yeah.
Now, what made you want to join the Communist Party?
Well, I was reading my sociology textbook when I was in college. I read about this guy named Karl Marx, and decided to learn more about the conflict perspective. And in doing so, I had to pick up more of Marx's works, and one thing led to another, and I decided that if I was going to learn more about socialist communist perspectives, I was going to have to probably join a communist party because it's really difficult to learn more about those perspectives in most mainstream narratives. So that I joined the party, and it's been a source of increasing education since then.
Okay. Now, did the Communist Party encourage you to run for city council?
No. This was on my own accord. I've been up here in the woods, kind of have a couple of people who are in the club who joined, and it's mostly been everything's been kind of on my own accord.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, was it a partisan race? Was there like a Democrat and a Republican and then you, or was it just individuals, or how did it work?
Oh, okay. So with small town elections like this, the offices are nonpartisan.
Hmm.
So how things came to be that I was known to be a communist and why this blew up as much as it has was a nonpartisan race. I ran my platform. I kept it strictly nonpartisan discussion. But when I did get elected, the local newspaper asked, "So are you a member of the Communist Party?" And of course, I'm not going to lie. So I told them flat out, I am. So that's why things have kind of gotten to be known that I'm an elected communist in the United States.
Great. Are there any other elected communists?
Uh, if there is, I don't really know them.
Okay. Now, I'm curious. How has that affected the way your constituents see you? I mean, do they say, "Oh, wow, you're the communist guy on city council"? Did it change their opinion of you? I mean, did you lose support? When it came out that you were a member of the Communist Party?
It's been a mixed bag. On some hands, people aren't really sure what communism is, since they've only heard the negative things. So then when they hear I'm a communist, there's some blowback. But on the other end of things, they think, well, if this is what communists support, then why is there so much stigma against it? So I think that there's a strong need to have some public representation for people who are in communist parties or socialist parties to run for office, to put out like a kind of like a public PSA that we have a certain political ideology that is separate from the mainstream. So I do think that there's worth in running for office at any level, from local, state, national, and so on.
In New York City, we have a member of city council named Charles Barron, and he's not a member of the Communist Party, but he does have a picture of Lenin in his office. And he's kind of a black nationalist activist, and he calls himself an elected revolutionary. And back when I was an activist, I actually campaigned for him when he was running for U.S. Congress. And you wouldn't believe, they just went all out to stop him from getting elected. I mean, like every major Democrat had press conferences, and they did everything they could to keep Charles Barron out of Congress. That was quite an experience, campaigning for Charles Barron. But he had a lot of support from the African-American community and from activist groups and such. And that was quite interesting. I know that at one point there was a communist judge in Detroit, Justin Rabbits, and I guess he was a Maoist, and he would quote the Little Red Book from the bench and things like that. I mean, have you been able to do anything interesting from your elected office? Are the city council meetings more interesting because they've got a communist sitting there?
Unfortunately, I can't say things have gotten too spicy. I've made my statements against constructing the new police station in regards that I find that it's rather, how do you say, it's not really unbecoming of the city to be able to invest so much when we're lacking resources for providing for homelessness, for providing for people who are in need, for uh, people who are at risk of being evicted. The city has none of these services, and that is pretty much almost every city throughout the country. But yet, the city seems to be, mm, how do I put this, really headstrong, particularly in the way of the mayor and a couple other people on council, towards getting this police station constructed, recognizing as a public safety concern. But at the same time, we already have a station, and we really don't have a lot of other assets. So if you already have something, whereas you have a need for something else that you don't, what do you invest in? And so those are the sorts of things I try to tackle.
Wow, I mean, you're taking on the police department there, though. It sounds like that could be a risky position to take in a small town sometimes, though, right?
That is what it is.
Okay. Now, what is the political atmosphere like in Wisconsin? You're more of a blue state, though. It's a Democrat state, if I'm not mistaken, right? It tends to vote Democrat or no.
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. I've just through my K-12, I transferred about 17 times between different schools. So I guess you could say I've kind of was able to traverse a lot of northern Wisconsin. Uh, I guess and then kind of post those graduate years and everything, I still moved around quite a lot, and I moved into Ashland back in 2014. So where does Wisconsin stand relatively so? There's a strong environmental concern among a lot of people across the state. That is probably one of the biggest things you'll see as a unifying factor among most people uh, in regards to wanting to protect the environment. Wisconsin's strong, particularly strong in that, I guess, in a lot of people I've talked to. Um, but as far as the political atmosphere, there's a lot of people who, of course, have their perspectives that they don't want increased taxes, and uh, they would like to see how should I put this? They would like to see the state government try to do a little more in the way of trying to help for those who are a little more destitute. There's usually a lack of social safety nets in Wisconsin. One of the few prominent ones is Badger Care and Food Share, but outside of that, there's not much else.
Well, I remember back in 2011, which is the year that you joined the Communist Party. We were all saying fight like Wisconsin because the state capital was being occupied by labor activists. Were you part of that? Were you one of the people occupying your state capitol building and defending the rights of unions?
Unfortunately, I was just starting to get radicalized into the paradigm. So while all that was going on, I was relatively distant from it, unfortunately. But there's a lot of teachers' unions and otherwise who were very strongly participating in that. I was more or less just a student who, at the time, was kind of somewhere between, I guess, the political paradigm of being somewhere between a Democrat and a Republican on some issues. And I've had to really relearn a lot of things that I had learned from a lot of either mainstream media or mainstream education, and broaden my perspectives outside the borders of the United States and learn more about the world. And that has been a big focus for me is in education.
Yeah, you still have on the books, I believe, that right to work anti-union law that was passed, right, by Scott Walker. Is that the case? Is that still on the books?
Is it on the books? I think it's already written into law.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to be repealed. There is state statutes before Walker, even by people like Jim Doyle, who passed. I didn't find this out until after I got elected, by the way, where municipalities can't increase their minimum wage above the state's level for minimum wage. As a At the time, that bill in 2005, I think it was June 1st. was enacted as sort of a bipartisan deal that if Jim Doyle was able to get the Republicans on board for increasing the state minimum law, that he would have to give them a bone, and this bone was putting the clamp on municipalities. But unfortunately for Mr. Jim Doyle's theory, he didn't win the re-election. Scott Walker came in, and the state's minimum wage didn't go up. It's much more than 7.25, and it's been 7.25 in the state of Wisconsin since 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been over 10 years, and our minimum wage hasn't gone up, while Minnesota and Michigan enjoy a minimum wage of around 9.84, 9.62, somewhere in that range, and Wisconsin's still sitting at the federal minimum wage of 7.25.
And what are the major, jobs people have in Wisconsin? I mean, you have a lot of farm jobs. Do you have, is there industries? Do you still have steel manufacturing, mining?
Well, in northern Wisconsin here, it's different from southern Wisconsin. In northern Wisconsin here, you get a lot of tourism, woodworking, logging. It's really a rural area. There is some farmland. I've known a couple farmers up here, but a lot of them have been bought out, or some of them have been abandoned, just because they can't keep up with some of the, big agribusinesses. So, in the Northwoods here, it's agriculture struggling, and it seems like a lot of our industry is reliant heavily on tourism.
Now, ethnically, I know that area, you have a lot of people from like Finland, Norway, Denmark. It's very Roman Catholic. Rural areas, you tend to, associate them with Protestants, with evangelicals. But I know there's a lot of Roman Catholics, in that area because of the ethnic makeup. Is that the case?
I've noticed that there's quite a few Finnish folks, and towards when you get down by Sword County, there seems to be like a lot of Polish folks. Yeah, it's
you yourself are Native American, right?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Bad River Band of Chippewa Indians. I mean, to a certain extent, I inherited, some of the white pigmentation that's unavoidable from a lot of the assimilation that's occurred throughout history and the forced relocation in Indian acts and so on. And there's all sorts of cultural factors that makes some Native Americans whiter than others. But that's...
You're a recognized member of a tribe.
Yes.
Okay, and is there a big indigenous population in Wisconsin?
Yes. There's the Menominee tribes. There's the Bad River. You got Ho-Chunk members, which are down closer towards Madison. And there's also, I think, Red Wing. I think it's Red Wing. And then there's LCO as well. Can't ignore them. There's a lot of tribes scattered throughout Wisconsin.
Wow. Now, I know Gus Hall, who was a very important leader of the Communist Party USA. He was from Minnesota, and he was of Finnish heritage. But it's similar, I mean, it's a different state, but it's the similar kind of background. He was from a family of activists who'd been active in the Iron Ranges and such, and from that area of the country. You think of like Minnesota, Wisconsin, up there. People even associate some of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan a little bit, and that there is a history of labor activism there and struggle. But I'd be also curious about, as a Native American, are you involved with the American Indian movement and AIM and any of the groups in there?
Oh, yeah, I see. I think I was able to visit down Chicago to go visit them. I think it was like the American Indian Cultural Center. That was down in Chicago. I'm not too heavily involved with some of the Native American movements. I'm more or less involved more so with my tribe on trying to deal with matters. There's Enbridge, the pipeline, line 5, that's rerouting, and it comes right through the city of Ashland. So I've been trying to get the city to take a stance, and we did get a resolution passed to oppose line 5 running through the lands of Bad River, and we got the city to recognize the sovereignty of the tribe to have that pipeline removed, which they provided ample amount of time for Enbridge to have that pipeline removed, and they've violated their contract. And Enbridge has had their pipeline running through Bed River for over 7 years now, and now they're trying to reroute it through, let's say around the Bed River tribe, but it still goes through the Bad River, which would mean if there's a rupture, you're talking about hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of gallons going to Lake Superior. And the tribe takes very seriously its stewardship, in a way, of protecting the Great Lakes and the Bad River watershed.
Yeah, there's been, a lot. There was the Standing Rock struggle. There was a big mobilization to stop that pipeline.
Yeah, and then there was a GTAC over here, where we had the taconite mine that was being planned out here. And then our tribe was able to mobilize and oppose that in a way that we were causing a lot of disruption, a lot of public backlash for the company. And then a mixture between that and the price of taconite ore going down was able to drive off that mining company that was coming up over here. So, yeah.
Well, let me also ask you, there are a number of Native American activists coming out of the 60s and 70s who were very hostile to communism and Marxism. They said this is a European ideology, it's a white man's ideology. And Russell Means, who was one of the principal leaders of the American Indian movement, and worked with the Black Panthers and all of that, ended up working for the CIA during the 1980s when the Contra War was happening in Nicaragua, when the CIA was arming folks in Nicaragua to fight against the socialist government. Russell Means, this Native American leader who'd been an activist, was actually flown down to Nicaragua to work with armed groups armed by the CIA to fight the Sandinistas. And Ward Churchill, who was kind of a Native American activist and academic, worked very closely with Russell Means and was his primary speechwriter during that time. Many people have talked about how, in the name of anti-communism, and in the name of accusing communists of being obsessed with historical progress and all of that, there's been an effort to kind of turn the Native American movement against socialism and against communism and kind of manipulate it for the CIA. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Do you have a comment on that? Or?
Well, I don't know how heavily the CIA is involved with my tribe or a couple others. And speaking full disclosure. But as far as, there's a lot of folks, particularly who join the military, who are Native American. There's a significant portion of misrepresentation in minorities where Native Americans overwhelmingly join the military. We've come to see this as sort of a issue regarding economic factors about what opportunities we have when we become of age and are able to participate in the labor force. It's probably more disparaging in other areas, but I've known in my tribe where I've had my relatives join the military for lack of real other options. Yeah. So this sort of economic lack of economic mobility drives people towards joining the military. So I can see how, in some ways, where there's a sense of wanting to be part of something more when you're in a small town and around population 400, I can get that.
A lot of people I went to school with, I'm from a small town in Ohio, and a lot of people I went to school with joined the military because it was seen as kind of a career building opportunity. You could travel the world, you could be an action hero.
And when you get done, you get your military veteran discount, right?
So. Right, that was the idea. But what I also thought was interesting, though, is when you talk about Native Americans in the military. There's the history of the Indian schools where the Native Americans were taken from their parents, and given this kind of religious, patriotic indoctrination and beaten if they spoke their own language, and you can see a lot
that here.
In impact. When I visited Eagle Butte Reservation in South Dakota, I remember seeing that the reservations are very divided between the Native Americans that have converted to Christianity, that are that are conservative, and the Native Americans who still practice the indigenous faiths and view the United States government as their oppressor and as the enemy. It's very, very divided. I mean, have you observed that as well?
Yeah, very widespread. I have some relatives who are staunchly pro-U.S. and they'll even go as far as to defend Augusto Pinochet in 1973 on some topics. And then on the other hand, I'll have some relatives who acknowledge that what the United States done to Native American peoples, and not just the United States, but even Canada and other colonizers, settler colonials, have done to indigenous population, have done unforgivable crimes, and that there needs to be serious talks about how we need to go above and beyond what the treaties have been set as, and saying we deserve to have a full-fledged recognition of a nation in some cases. So I've seen the full spectrum for nationalism for the United States and for Native American movements. It's a very wide spectrum.
Well, what I find to be shocking is that now among the right wing, there's an attempt to deny that genocide was committed against the Native Americans. Dinesh D'Souza, the Fox News conservative, has gone as far as saying, well, it was disease. Native Americans were killed by disease. There were no massacres. You know, I saw him say this on Fox News with a straight face. You know, in his documentary film he made, America, he tries to deny that there was actually a genocide committed against Native Americans. But then we have thinkers like Ayn Rand, who's still widely loved. That was Paul Ryan, Congressman Paul Ryan's, his greatest inspiration was this free market libertarian thinker named Ayn Rand. And she said that the genocide of Native Americans was justified because they had no right to the soil if they were not building on it. So, among the right, you would think that, in the 1970s and 80s, it felt like almost as a country, we came to a recognition. It was the first time we really as a country recognized that the Native Americans, what was done to them was wrong. Thanksgiving, it's a myth. There was real crimes committed. It seemed like kind of the national consensus. And, Republicans, Ronald Reagan said this, other people said this. But now I feel like that's being a little bit eroded. And when Donald Trump has that meeting with Native American veterans in front of a picture of Andrew Jackson, and then he makes, cracks about Elizabeth Warren and such while he's there, being very disrespectful and rude. It makes you wonder if on the right wing there's an attempt to kind of roll back that understanding, that recognition that the American Indian movement and so much activism kind of forced us to recognize. I mean, it's certainly disturbing to me. I'm sure it's disturbing to you as well.
Certainly. It's been seeing this sort of rolling back of understanding history, of course. And in a lot of ways, you have to keep up on this stuff, unfortunately. Otherwise, if you keep reading this stuff from either Texas Instruments or otherwise, there'll be sometimes this whitewashing of history.
That's a textbook company, right? Texas Instruments.
Yeah, they make
calculators and such, right?
Yep. Yeah. I know that they're. I think they're. If I stand right, is that they do a lot of education creation for materials in public schools. There's whitewashing about either what we've done in Vietnam, what we've done in probably our role for Afghanistan, our role with Native American history. You won't see the Taino people being mentioned during lessons with Christopher Columbus. So there's a strong undercurrent in the United States, at least. I'm not sure about Canada, but at least in the United States, on trying to whitewash this history.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see what's going on. Now, would you encourage other communists to run for public office like you have?
Yes, if it's necessary. For me, I ran for office because I had the opportunity to make that action. But if there's anything I'd recommend more than doing that is to get a club with other people you know, and then make some actions together, and trying to help form either local labor movements. Because something I've learned on being in city council is that unless you have a organized coalition of people who want to see these real demands coming to fruition, then it's tough to convince other members of council to undertake these. And you have to generate a lot of public discourse. So I feel that I kind of went in backwards almost to my city council position. Maybe that's something I would change if I was able to consider re-election again. But on the other hand,
and then run for office. Is that what you're saying?
yes, it's worthwhile to do that. But it's also worthwhile that if you have the opportunity to generate public interest for your segment of ideology, then run for office. Get that discourse going. And if you take office, great. If you don't, you at least get some discourse started. And that's the way I recommend it. But you do need at some point to have your coalitions going. That's something I do heavily recommend, or to be part of coalitions.
A. Philip Randolph, who was a socialist leader of the Sleeping Car Porters Union, met with Roosevelt at the White House. And this could just be a legend. We don't know. I mean, I wasn't in the room, neither were you. But supposedly, Randolph made a number of progressive proposals to Roosevelt. And Roosevelt told him, go out and make me do it. Meaning that, unless you do a lot of organizing and activism, I won't be able to carry out this agenda. I'd like to do these things, so go out and make me do it, was the quote. And that a lot of progressive people have interpreted that as meaning that elections are one thing. They're an important struggle, but in the end of the day, it's only a mass popular mobilization that will really change things. Now, is this anti-lockdown nonsense that we're seeing from the right wing, is that happening in Wisconsin? Are you dealing with that?
Oh, yes, to a certain extent, yes. We've had some demonstrations go down at the Capitol in Madison opposing the stay-at-home orders issued by Tony Evers. You have that going on, and then I work at a deli. I was declared an essential worker. I talk with my coworkers a lot from in every department. And, the sort of funny thing is that we all kind of recognize that as much as these, whether it's Trump or the people who support him, or people who are just otherwise outright opposed to being told this presumptive draconian order to try to stay at home and limit your social interaction as state tyranny, there are plenty of people who are out working right now who are afraid that if they should come into contact with this virus, they don't know whether or not they'll live or die. And then there are people who just outright believe that the virus was a hoax. It's ridiculous. It's all sorts of conspiracy theory nonsense. There's a lot of that.
Well, indeed. Well, I almost don't get it, right? Because it's like, the allegation from the right wing is that all of us on the left are a bunch of snowflakes. We can't handle anything tough. We're the ones following the rules. We're staying home. We're social distancing. It's people on the right who are just screaming. They can't take it. They need a haircut really bad. They need to, they need to go outside. They want to go eat at a restaurant. Oh, they can't take it, and they're going to revolt. And this is communism. I see
the comparisons by the right wing of equating Tony Evers with Hitler, Stalin, or Mao, and I'm like, none of these comparisons are equivocating.
We're all frustrated. The fact that there's mass unemployment right now, the unemployment numbers have come through, mass unemployment, Great Depression level unemployment. The oil prices are low, evictions, Uber drivers, forget it. There's a lot of people that are really suffering because of this social distancing. But if we don't hold out and get this under control first, and we all just go back to work right now, it's going to get worse, right? We need to come together as a society and deal with this. And I feel like there's a divide among the ruling class right now. I feel like the lower level capitalists are the ones that are pushing this anti-lockdown protest because they know that Amazon's stock is the highest it's ever been in decades. Walmart is doing great. And some businesses are making out like bandits amid this. Meanwhile, the fracking companies, the oil prices are so low, the fracking companies that Trump is close with, they're going to be going out of business. A lot of the, Hobby Lobby is a store chain that is really close with Trump. They're going to be out of business. They've closed all stores until further notice. And I think that it's the lower level capitalists that are suffering. And they're afraid that they're going to be put out of business. And they're seeing these higher level capitalists like Jeff Bezos, who don't like Trump. They're seeing them kind of take a sweep. Walmart doesn't like Trump. And that's what they're afraid of. And that Trump has this weird kind of coalition. He's close with Betsy DeVos. She's the Secretary of Education. And Betsy DeVos, she's tied to Amway, Tupperware parties. Well, not many Tupperware parties.
Betsy DeVos is heavily involved with trying to reduce the amount of teachers in education, and from what I understand, is kind of a proponent for charter schools, which is just privatized education.
Yeah, no, I've talked to a number of people about Betsy DeVos, and her brother is Eric Prince of Blackwater, actually, and her billion.
Blackwater. I haven't heard that since what? Man,
it's called
2003.
Academy. They changed the name, so it's completely different. It's Academy, not Blackwater, but it's a military corporation. And the other thing is that her money comes from a multi-level marketing scheme called Amway, right? It's a hustle. So that's Betsy DeVos, our Secretary of Education. But I feel like there is a feeling some of the higher levels of capital would prefer somebody who went to a Rockefeller think tank and would run things. Obama was all about charter schools and hurting teachers unions as well, but he was more strategic about it. He was hiring somebody from an Ivy League school to do it. Whereas Trump is just kind of bringing in these lower levels of capital. I feel like every capitalist who's ever gone to prison for insider trading or something like that
is at some point getting into office. Yeah,
it's kind of like that's kind of who Trump is made of. The ones that are rich enough to buy their way out of it, they're not for Trump, but it's those lower levels of capital, and this is a divide. In Wisconsin, out in your state,
you know why he's bringing those people in.
Why?
Trust is a very scarce commodity, and when you have somebody in your own league that you can bring in, is that such a valuable commodity to have?
Indeed. Well, out in Wisconsin, we've seen this before where there's been kind of an uprising among the lower levels of American capital. Out in Wisconsin, you've got the John Birch Society, right? The far right group.
I haven't heard of that in a hot minute.
Yeah, they're still out there. Appleton, Wisconsin, right? I don't know where that is.
So yeah.
Where's Appleton? Is that
Appleton is towards Shawano, I believe. It's
okay.
A little bit south of Shawano, if I stand correct.
Yeah, and Joe McCarthy is from Wisconsin, right?
Oh, which part? I forget.
I don't know where, but he was a congressman from or a senator from Wisconsin, I believe.
Yeah, I'm making McCarthy roll in his grave right now.
Yeah. I mean, he would be furious to see that an open communist was elected to city council in his home state. But let's not forget that he drank himself to death after being nationally disgraced. So, So what's that?
Yeah. Actually, I know that's actually the first time I think I've heard about Joe McCarthy's death. I didn't look into it, but
he's not really he's not well known in your state anymore, I guess. That's what you're telling me.
Well, no. I've heard of Joe McCarthy. I didn't hear about his death. I didn't know he drank himself to death. That's an interesting facet to know.
Yeah. Joe McCarthy. So there's a long history of labor struggles in your area, and I know there's a lot of people that are probably really suffering amid this pandemic and are looking for the government to step up and take care of the people, not just the big corporations. So I'm sure that from your position in city council, you'll be doing your best to represent the working class and make sure that voices are heard. Do you have any interesting proposals or any hopes for the coming time as we face these economic hard times and the pandemic?
I've been trying to press the city to try to do some more action in regards to doing the direct assistance. But unless the city administrator and the mayor aren't able to enact that, or if I can get another resolution going and try to force the hand on them to do something, then not just a resolution, but a ordinance, at least, then that would require them to do something a little more direct. But it seems like just mentioning what we should do this during a emergency meeting at our city council discussion, even getting a couple other councilors to recognize we should do something direct, isn't enough to get our mayor and our city administrator to do something to providing direct relief to charities or set up an organization to do it for providing either rental assistance or providing food assistance. It's not enough. It doesn't seem like just talking is enough. So at some point, I recognize that if I had some more leverage, perhaps, with mass movements. Maybe something would be a little this concern would be taken a little more seriously. But as it isn't, I will probably have to see about drafting an ordinance during this crisis if the city will do anything.
Very good. Well, I'm sure you're going to be on top of it. And it's been really a pleasure to speak with you. Wahsayah Whitebird, who is a communist member of the city council in Ashland, Wisconsin. Thanks for talking to us today. My best wishes to you.
Pleasure talking.